Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales, and her royal family. Today we bring you some news. The banishment Queen Camilla exiled after sapphire betrayal. In a move that has sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the British monarchy, sources within Buckingham Palace have confirmed that Queen Camilla has been indefinitely barred from all official royal residences and public duties following a direct order from King Charles III. The unprecedented decision, effectively a form of royal exile, marks the catastrophic conclusion to a crisis that began with the mysterious disappearance of Princess Diana's iconic sapphire tiara and culminated in the king's discovery of what senior aides are calling a calculated and deeply wounding betrayal. The carefully manufactured picture of togetherness that characterized the early years of King Charles's reign has been broken as a result of the rift which has caused the House of Windsor to experience its most deep internal anguish since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Not only does it disclose a narrative of marital conflict, but it also shows a story of ambition, historical grievance, and the unquiet ghost of a history that the monarchy has never been able to properly escape. The shattered crown that resulted from what started out as a quest for a misplaced gem has brought to light the deep, unhealed scars that lurk just beyond the surface of royal pomp. This is the story of how Queen Camilla's alleged campaign to overwrite the legacy of her predecessor led to a confrontation with the king, a heartbreaking confession, and her ultimate banishment, leaving a fragile monarch to rule alone and the future of the institution hanging precariously in the balance. The story is told in the second person. The ghost of the sapphire. Instead of a scream, there was an eerie calm that greeted the beginning of the catastrophe. On a hazy Tuesday morning before the first rays of dawn had penetrated the London fog, King Charles III made his way to the fortified and climate-controlled vault that was located inside his private quarters at Buckingham Palace. A somber communion with the items that marked his life and heritage, it was a practice that he didn't conduct very often, yet it was something he did. It was on this particular day when the routine was disrupted. One of the rare antiques that was stored within the vault was a velvet pedestal that was empty despite its presence. A magnificent sapphire tiara that had been given to Princess Diana by Queen Elizabeth II as a wedding present in 1981 was no longer available. There were no indications that someone had broken in. There was no indication that the intricate alarm system which was being monitored by the Royal Protection Command SO-14 had been raised. The biometric lock on the vault, which was only accessible to a select few people, including the king himself, did not reveal any evidence of an effort to gain illegal entry. In the place where the gorgeous item, which had been once known as the Spencer Sapphire Tiara, should have been there was nothing but a chilly and empty emptiness. This was not a typical kind of theft. The tiara was more than just a collection of magnificent stones. It was a vessel of memory, a compelling emblem of a chapter in royal history that continues to make the contemporary monarchy what it is today. The deep blue sapphire that was at the center of the ring, which was surrounded by 14 diamonds that were perfect, had shone brightly from the crown of Diana's head at some of her most successful and rebellious moments. It was a reminder of the lady who was revered by millions of people as the people's princess. And it was a sign of the tragedy that has put an unavoidable shade over Charles's life and reign. It was a symbol of a marriage that was like something out of a fairy tale, but turned into a public conflict. As a symbolic act of sacrilege, its removal occurred. The response of the king was characterized as one of profound and silent shock, according to a source close to the royal household who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The source also said that the king's first reaction was not anger, but rather a profound and visceral state of discomfort. As a piece of history that he felt obligated to preserve, that tiara served as a direct connection to the woman who had given birth to his boys. When it was not there, it was as if memory itself had been violated. Almost immediately, the palace was seized with the issue of who might have been responsible for such an outrage. Who had the ability to remove an item that had such a significant amount of symbolic weight, as well as the motivation and the courage to do so? Moreover, why now, at a time when the stability of the monarchy and the health of the king himself were more precarious than they had ever been before? Either it was a warning shot from an unknown adversary, or far more horrifying, it was an act of retribution from inside the organization. As well as the lockdown of the palace, the silent queen inside the span of 1 hour. Buckingham Palace was put under an unprecedented lockdown policy inside the palace. The towering main gates, which are often used as a highway for both workers and visitors, swung shut with a finality that seemed almost foreboding. A special task team from Scotland Yard's Specialist Crime Directorate was secretly called, and they coordinated with the palace's own security detail to undertake a painstaking top-to-bottom search. All access and departure points were shut, and the search was conducted until the palace was completely searched. The paranoia that pervaded the atmosphere within the royal walls became more severe. Those who had been with the royal family for a long time and were familiar with the routines of royal life exchanged uneasy looks in the halls. A thorough examination was performed on each and every corner, each and every logbook was examined, and hundreds of hours of CCTV video were rewound and examined frame by frame. The first concern was swiftly validated by the inquiry, which revealed that this was an inside job. A person with the greatest degree of clearance, someone who could go through the palace's most protected regions without arousing suspicion, was required to be the perpetrator of the crime. There was one figure who stood in sharp contrast to the mounting terror, and that was Queen Camilla. Investigators started their cautious inquiry immediately. It was seen that the Queen was sitting alone in the royal tea parlor, while aides were rushing about, guards were speaking in hushed tones, and advisors were debating with one another in emergency meetings. After some time had passed, a footman who had served her earlier that morning reported to a colleague that she was stirring her cup of Earl Grey with a long and methodical pace, her countenance being a mask of unreadable serenity. It was observed that she smiled in a way that was so subtle that it was practically impossible to detect to anybody in particular at one time. This unsettling tranquility was not overlooked by anybody. One of the palace servants who had worked there for a long period whispered in a reliable friend that it was bizarre. This opinion immediately spread throughout the below-stairs network. Everyone was on edge, dreading the worst, and she seemed to be doing nothing more than waiting for the weather to clear up while everyone else was on edge. The feeling was not only calm, rather it was separation. The manner in which Queen Camilla conducted herself when she was called in for preliminary questioning by the investigation task force only served to increase the level of suspicion. When she came, she was well clothed, and her attitude was calm. She provided a clear and almost scripted response to each and every question that was asked of her. When she was asked about her whereabouts at the time that it was suspected that the tiara had been stolen, she said in a calm and collected manner, "I was in the East Reading Room with my private secretary." Visitors are welcome to look at the visitor records and the surveillance recordings, each and every one of her alibi. To confirm the meeting, the secretary verified it. The cameras provided evidence that it was her location. The timetable that she provided did not include any contradictions or gaps. In a subsequent investigation, one of the investigators characterized it as being too perfect, unnervingly so. Whatever Camilla did not do was the thing that the investigators found to be the most peculiar. In no way, shape, or form did she ever ask about the status of the search. There was no indication that she was concerned about the possible harm that may be done to the royal family's image. In a moment of unguarded fear, a subordinate member of the staff approached her and said, "Ma'am, what measures will we take in the event that the crown is not located?" Camilla is reported to have offered another thin smile and replied, "Then we will have to build a new mythology, won't we?" within the royal kitchens and staff quarters that one phrase became the topic of a never-ending stream of whispered discussion between the staff members. An expression devoid of passion, it was a reaction that was chillingly pragmatic in nature, and it was in response to the degradation of a hallowed memory. Soon after the rumors made their way out of the royal walls, the hashtags Camilla knows and wears the crown started to become popular on various social media platforms. As soon as they were aware of a significant story, journalists working for tabloids began investigating the Queen's recent actions in an effort to identify a pattern. The story was starting to take shape. Was Camilla's spooky serenity the sign of an innocent lady who maintained elegance in the face of pressure, or was it the trademark of a genius who quietly observed the unfolding of her own painstakingly constructed plan? The process of dismantling a consort. This episode with the tiara was not a single occurrence, but rather the conclusion of a subtle but daring campaign that Camilla had been running to redefine her status inside the monarchy, according to those who had extensive experience observing royal affairs. They contend that this effort was a direct threat to the carefully planned transition strategy that had been put out by the late Queen Elizabeth II. In the months leading up to her passing, Queen Elizabeth II had expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be given the title of Queen Consort upon Charles's assumption to the throne. A public that is still bitterly split by Camilla's participation in the dissolution of Charles's first marriage was the target audience for this great act of royal statecraft, which was aimed to appease the public. It was a significant difference that she was referred to be the consort, which positioned her as the king's supporter rather than his equal. She was a companion rather than a co-ruler. In spite of this, a development that was inconspicuous but substantial occurred not long after Charles was crowned king. The title of Camilla was modified on the official website of the royal family for the first time. It was decided to remove the term consort. For all intents and purposes, she was now referred to as the Queen. Although strictly speaking, the wife of a king is considered to be a queen, the elimination of the qualifying adjective was perceived by traditionalists as a significant message. A former counselor of the palace made the observation that it was a clear signal of intent. It was contrary to the desires of Queen Elizabeth, if not the wording of her wishes. Repositioning herself from the role of the king's wife to that of a power in her own right was the first significant move that she took. Following this alteration in the title, a series of acts were taken that muddied the customary bounds of the function of a consort. Camilla had began to take a more active role in discussions on affairs of state, according to insiders from Whitehall and internal data that were leaked to the public. In the conversations that she was having with members of the government, she was no longer only a listening spectator. It has been alleged that her name was included in internal memoranda, alongside ideas on public health programs and educational changes. These are areas that are traditionally designated for the king and his ministers. It was verified by a senior Whitehall source who spoke anonymously to a major newspaper that Camilla had presided over at least 2 meetings with cabinet members without King Charles being present. The insider indicated that she did more than simply attend. She was the one who led the conversation. It was clear that she was eloquent, well-informed, and aggressive. There was little doubt that she was not there only to act as a representative for her husband. Additionally, her temperament had changed when she was inside the castle. It was observed by staff members who had previously worked under Queen Elizabeth II that she had changed from her initially cautious modesty. It was said that she disrupted the king when he was receiving private briefings, and on one occasion she unilaterally changed his official trip itinerary, claiming his exhaustion as the reason. A long-standing member of the staff said that the king did not raise any objections. In light of the fact that his health was deteriorating, it was becoming more obvious that he was giving her more and more ground. Her role as the de facto chief executive of the kingdom was being carried out by her. With the intention of establishing a new system, this steady consolidation of power was carried out in a transparent and somewhat audacious manner. The public, on the other hand, continued to be dubious. There was an increase in the volume of the murmurs on royal forums and social media. The question is whether this was a real endeavor to modernize the monarchy or a power grab aimed to protect her position and, more importantly, to ultimately erase the memory of Princess Diana. If Camilla could so simply change a title that was conferred upon her by a revered king and involve herself into political events, then what would prevent her from changing history itself, television as a courtroom? When the level of public anxiety reached its highest point, Queen Camilla took the most bold step she had ever taken. She participated in a live television interview that lasted for 40 minutes and was aired on a major national broadcast network without giving previous warning to the communications staff of the king, and most importantly, without alerting King Charles himself. Careful consideration was given to the setting. When Camilla was seated in a sophisticated drawing room, she wore a silk dress made of ivory, and she gave off the impression of being authoritative while also being friendly. Her remarks, on the other hand, were everything but kind. She started to talk about King Charles's health in an unprecedentedly intimate manner, and she did it with the placid face of someone who was discussing the weather. It has been a very difficult time for him. She remarked, her tone laden with the tacit understanding that she had developed over time. She portrayed herself as his vital guide and defender, the steady hand that steers the ship through choppy waves. She talked of his troubles with the responsibilities of his new job and claimed that he frequently felt lost within his own palace. She used the phrase, lost within his own palace, to describe herself. Every major decision in the past year, from foreign policy briefings to the allocation of charitable funds, has been something I have had to directly oversee and coordinate, she asserted in a carefully written but startling accusation. I have been responsible for overseeing and coordinating everything from the beginning to the end. Without a doubt, the inference was clear. It was not enough for her to just provide assistance. She was in charge. She constructed a narrative in which King Charles was seen as a vulnerable and deteriorating figurehead, and she was shown as the actual authority behind the throne. There were no typical expressions of respect, and there were no words of admiration for the ability of her husband to persevere. Camilla, her vision, and the power that she now had were the only things that existed. The interview was brought to the attention of King Charles, who was recuperating at Sandringham at the time in the same manner that the rest of the world was introduced to it by viewing it on television. He was described as being utterly stunned, then deeply wounded, according to a source at Sandringham. While his advisors tried to perform damage control, the king allegedly sat in silence for hours looking at the TV. A serious breach of his dignity occurred when the public was made aware of the private health issues he was experiencing. It was a feature in the backdrop that had the most profound impact, however. Behind Camilla was a big bookcase that was crammed with images of the family that had been meticulously organized. One thing that was noticeably lacking from the exhibit was any kind of picture of Princess Diana. An intentional and symbolic erasing was carried out. This was not only a mistake, rather it was a message meant for Charles to take in. The interview, in conjunction with the disappearance of the tiara, gave the impression of a concerted attack on Diana's legacy, which he had taken an oath to safeguard for the sake of his boys and the collective memory of the country. The response from members of the royal family was prompt and harsh, despite the delay. It has been stated that Prince William, the Prince of Wales, was quite angry. Because he was the most ardent supporter of his mother's memory, he saw the interview as a deliberate attempt to show disrespect to both his father and his mother, who had passed away already. Almost immediately, he called an emergency conference with his own advisors in order to evaluate the extent of the damage. At that same moment, the prince's relationship with his stepmother, which had hitherto been characterized by a chilly demeanor, had permanently frozen into a glacier of mistrust. There was a significant rift among the public. A number of individuals lauded Camilla's openness as an indication of a more open and honest monarchy. However, a great many of people were angered by what they saw to be a cold and manipulative power move, as well as a terrible lack of respect for both the sick king and the memories of the Princess of Wales that will go on forever. Camilla's position had not been strengthened by the interview. Rather, it had isolated her and brought to light the gap that existed between her aspirations and the feelings of the general public. A king's judgment and a crown of thorns are both present. In the end, the interview on television was the last straw. A confidential meeting was scheduled to take place at Clarence House the next day, and King Charles invited Queen Camilla to attend. There were no assistants or advisors there. It was just the two of them in a room that was filled with charges that were not stated. It was not the interview that was the topic of discussion. Rather, it was something far more fundamental, the missing tiara. Over the course of the intervening hours, a frenzied search had led to the discovery of a terrible revelation. It was not the case that the tiara had been taken from the castle. The item had been discovered by a reliable member of the king's staff concealed inside one of Queen Camilla's secret closets at Ray Mill House, which is the property she uses for her country retreat. "I am curious as to what you did with Diana's tiara." According to a person who was informed on the encounter, Charles inquired with a voice that was brittle with a grief he thought had been long buried. His look was not that of a spouse, but rather that of a king facing an act of high treason against the emotional heart of the family. Camilla finally broke the tight stillness that had been around her for a time. Her admission was not one of contrition, but rather of defiance. "I took it," she continued, her voice firm, but resonant with the hatred that she had harbored for decades. "I am the crown prince. I got the impression that I was in the right." She continued, the words falling out in a flood of words that had been repressed for a very long time. She went on to explain that she had been living in the enormous shadow cast by Diana for a number of years. In the past, she had been referred to as the other woman, the public's villain, and the emblem of a collective sorrow. The canonization of Diana was followed by the condemnation of Camilla. According to her admission, the tiara was more than simply a piece of jewelry. It was the ultimate representation of the affection and legitimacy that she believed had been denied to her during her whole life. According to reports, she added, "I took it because I had to," as her voice was breaking. "It was the only way to demonstrate that here in this family I am not a ghost," she said. "That there is value in me. That I am present here." The time when King Charles made his revelation was the moment that the last thread of their emotional connection broke. This act of hers was not only a theft, rather it was a defilement that was motivated by a jealousy that had been brewing for many years. She had not intended to leave her own legacy behind when she took the tiara. Rather, she had intended to seize Diana's. She had attempted to physically insert herself into the story from which she had always felt excluded, and in doing so, she had brought back all of the suffering, shame, and loss that the king had spent his whole life attempting to cope with. In its previous form, the crown of sapphires was an adornment. Nonetheless, it had transformed into a crown of thorns. After spending some time in that chamber, Charles came to the realization that the abyss that separated them could not be bridged. To put it another way, there was a fundamental tension between memory and ambition, between a sense of obligation to the past and an urgent need to remake it. The decree of the royal family and the Queen's exile. There was no attempt at reconciliation throughout the discussion. Last but not least, it was a painful confession of two facts that cannot be reconciled. Upon the closing of the door to the drawing room, it signified the conclusion of their partnership, which included both public and private aspects. There were many people inside King Charles's inner circle who were taken aback by the decisiveness with which he behaved. The anguish he felt turned into determination. In addition to being too harmful to the institution that he had taken an oath to govern, the treachery was also too personal and too symbolic. Within the span of 48 hours, by means of their separate private secretaries, a command that was both discreet and stern was issued. Queen Camilla was scheduled to take an indefinite leave of absence from all public duties. She was to evacuate her quarters at Buckingham Palace and Clarence House and withdraw to her own property Highgrove House, which is located in Gloucestershire. In spite of the fact that the public announcement, when it was finally issued, would be couched in diplomatic language about the Queen's need for a time of rest and recuperation, the reality that prevailed inside the palace was glaring and unmistakable. She was sent in exile. As a result of the absence of a formal declaration of divorce or the removal of her title, such a move would have constitutionally unpredictable results. On the other hand, she was removed from the royal life in practice. Her name was erased from the planning of any and all future events inside the state in a stealthy manner. Her office was virtually shut down, and its employees were offered other positions. The king would henceforth make his appearances by himself. The idea of a solitary ruler emerged as the new reality, which was dark and gloomy. The seat next to King Charles was never occupied at any of the state banquets, memorials, or diplomatic receptions that were presented. A melancholy picture of a king governing in solitude, burdened by his crown and his past, replaced the passionate gestures and shared grins that had earlier signified their persistent union. These movements and smiles had been a representation of their long-lasting alliance. A monarchy that is divided but retaining its legacy. A profound and long-lasting rift has been established among the royal family as a result of the aftermath from Camilla's trip into exile. Despite the fact that Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, have been silent in public over the issue, they have adhered to the royal credo of never complain, never explain. However, their actions have conveyed a great deal of information. Because they are the principal custodians of Diana's legacy, their emotional distance from Camilla has grown to the point where it is becoming an impenetrable wall. Displays of family togetherness that were meticulously staged are a thing of the past for the family. Instead, the Prince and Princess of Wales have devoted themselves to their own work, concentrating on projects such as mental health and early childhood development that are reminiscent of the topics that their late mother advocated for. They are in the process of constructing a different court, one that will be characterized by responsibility modernism and an unspoken but steadfast allegiance to Diana's legacy. The fact that they have chosen to remain neutral is a big message in and of itself. They do not support the lady who has caused their father and their mother such overwhelming suffering. In response to the king's situation, the British population, which was formerly comprised of a diverse array of viewpoints, has shown an unexpectedly large amount of compassion. The picture of an elderly king who is alone, who has been deceived by his wife, and who is plagued by the past has struck a chord with many people. From criticizing Charles for his past errors to empathizing with him as a man struggling with enormous personal and public pressures, the narrative has evolved from its previous position of judging Charles. In a final and symbolic gesture, the Spencer sapphire tiara was returned in a stealthy manner to the safe vault that houses the royal collection. Almost immediately after that, it was put on display for the general public in a special exhibition that was held in honor of Princess Diana. Despite the fact that there was no major announcement, the message was unmistakable. The tiara, along with the tradition it embodies, does not belong to a single person. Rather, it is a part of history and the memory of the lady who wore it with such elegance and defiance. As a result of the crisis, the monarchy has lost its ability to reform. Furthermore, it has confirmed in the most excruciating manner imaginable the continuing power that Princess Diana has. It is no longer the case that her spirit just lingers in the halls of the palace. Rather, it has been shown to be a powerful and active force that is capable of influencing the course of events for the crown. It is ironic that Queen Camilla has been driven into the shadows as a result of her wager to capture the narrative and claim her position in the light. On the other hand, the legacy of the lady whom she wanted to eclipse has never shined more brilliantly with the passage of time. Now that he is the only ruler, the king is a figure of both tragedy and responsibility. One of the questions that looms over his reign is whether or not the monarchy which will be led by King William V in the future will be able to ultimately recover from the divides that have occurred in the past. However, there is one thing that can be said with absolute certainty. The story of Charles and Camilla is a cautionary tale that demonstrates that in the House of Windsor, the past is never completely behind, and there are certain shadows that can never be ran away from. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.